A baby fox begged humans to save his pregnant mother. What happened next was unreal. The morning air was sharp and cold along the edge of Pinewood Forest, where the dirt road met the trees. It was early March, and patches of stubborn snow still clung to the shadowed places beneath the pines. Michael Chen had been driving this route for 3 years, delivering supplies to a small outdoor education center tucked deep in the forest. He knew every curve, every pothole, every place where deer liked to cross at dawn, but he had never seen anything like this. At first, he thought it was a dog. A small reddish shape stood in the middle of the road, just beyond the bend. Michael slowed the truck, expecting the animal to bolt into the brush. Instead, it stayed exactly where it was. As he came closer, his headlights caught the creature fully. A young fox, no bigger than a house cat, its rust-colored fur damp and matted, its black legs trembling. Michael stopped the truck 20 feet away and waited. The fox didn't run. It stood there, staring directly at him through the windshield. Its ears were pinned back and its mouth hung slightly open, panting. Then it did something that made Michael's breath catch. It took 3 deliberate steps toward the truck, stopped, looked back over its shoulder toward the forest, and then looked at Michael again. It was the look that did it. Not the empty gaze of a wild animal startled by headlights, but something else, something urgent. If you're enjoying this story, please subscribe and stay with us. Michael turned off the engine and stepped out slowly, leaving the door open in case he needed to retreat quickly. The fox didn't move. Its amber eyes locked onto him, unblinking. Then it turned and trotted a few steps toward the tree line, stopped, and looked back. It repeated the motion. Step, step, stop. Look back. You want me to follow you, Michael said aloud, his voice strange in the quiet morning. The fox's ears flicked forward. It took another few steps, slower this time, then sat down and waited. Michael had grown up in the city. He knew almost nothing about wild animals except what he'd seen in documentaries. But he understood body language. He understood desperation. And this fox, this young, scraggly, shivering fox, was begging. He grabbed his phone and a flashlight from the truck and followed. The fox led him off the road and into the forest, weaving between the trees with surprising precision. It moved just fast enough to stay ahead, but not so fast that Michael couldn't keep up. Every few seconds, it glanced back to make sure he was still there. The underbrush was thick, scratching at Michael's jeans, and the ground was uneven, roots and stones hidden beneath a slick layer of wet leaves. After about 200 yards, the fox stopped at the base of a steep embankment. Michael's flashlight beam swept over the area, a tangle of fallen branches, a half-collapsed den dug into the hillside, and then he saw her, the mother fox. She was lying on her side at the bottom of a shallow ravine, partially hidden by brambles. Her belly was distended, clearly pregnant, and one of her hind legs was caught in something, a rusted old leg-hold trap, the kind that hadn't been legal in this state for over a decade. The metal teeth had clamped down just above her ankle. Blood matted the fur around the wound. Her breathing was labored, visible even from a distance. Her eyes were half closed. The baby fox scrambled down the embankment and pressed itself against her side, whimpering softly. The mother's eyes opened briefly, and she made a low, rattling sound, not a growl, a sound of exhaustion, of surrender. Michael stood frozen, his heart pounding. He had no idea what to do. Call someone. Who? Animal control wouldn't open for another 2 hours. A wildlife rescue? Did they even exist out here? The baby fox looked up at him again. Its eyes were wet, reflecting the flashlight beam. "Okay," Michael whispered. "Okay, I'll help." He pulled out his phone. No signal. Of course. He was too deep in the forest. He'd have to go back to the truck, drive until he found reception, call someone, anyone, and hope they could get here in time. But as he turned to go, the baby fox made a sharp, high-pitched bark. Michael stopped. The fox barked again, insistent, and then it did something extraordinary. It grabbed the edge of Michael's pant leg with its teeth and tugged, not aggressive, not fearful, pleading. "I have to get help," Michael said, his voice tight. "I can't do this alone." The mother fox's breathing grew more ragged. Her sides heaved with effort. She was running out of time. Michael looked at the trap, then at the baby, then back at the mother. He made a decision. He scrambled down the embankment, careful not to disturb the brambles too much, and knelt beside the injured fox. She flinched, a weak, reflexive movement, but she didn't try to bite. Her energy was gone. Michael set the flashlight on the ground, angling it so he could see the trap clearly. It was old, corroded, but still vicious. The jaws had bitten deep. He'd have to pry them open. He pulled off his jacket and wrapped it around his hands for protection, then placed his fingers on the springs on either side of the trap. "I'm sorry," he whispered to the mother fox. "This is going to hurt." He pressed down hard. The springs resisted, stiff with rust and tension. His hands shook. The mother fox whimpered, a sound so small and broken it made Michael's chest ache. The baby fox stood just inches away, watching every movement. Michael gritted his teeth and pushed harder. The springs gave a fraction of an inch, then another. The metal jaws began to separate. The mother fox cried out a sharp, wounded sound, and Michael nearly let go. But then the trap released with a dull clang, and the fox's leg was free. She pulled it close to her body immediately, panting. The wound was deep, raw, and still bleeding. Michael tore a strip from the bottom of his shirt and wrapped it gently around her leg, trying to apply pressure without causing more pain. She didn't resist. She just lay there, exhausted, her eyes half open. The baby fox pressed closer to her, licking her face. She responded with a weak nudge of her nose. Michael sat back on his heels, breathing hard. His hands were shaking, smeared with blood and rust. The sky above the trees was beginning to lighten, shifting from black to deep blue. Dawn was coming. "We need to get you both out of here," Michael said quietly. The question was, how? Michael knew he couldn't carry the mother fox back to the truck, not through 200 yards of dense forest, over uneven ground, with her injured and heavily pregnant. She was weak, possibly in shock, and any rough movement might hurt her further or trigger labor prematurely. But staying here wasn't an option either. The temperature was dropping and she was losing blood. He looked at the baby fox, who was still pressed against his mother's side. "I'll be right back," Michael said, as if the animal could understand. "I promise, I'm going to get help." The baby fox's ears went flat. It made a soft, anxious sound. Michael climbed back up the embankment as quickly as he could, stumbling twice on the slick leaves, and ran back through the forest toward the road. His lungs burned, branches whipped against his face. When he reached the truck, he jumped in, started the engine, and drove hard until his phone finally showed a single bar of signal. He called the outdoor education center first. No answer. It was too early. He tried the local veterinary clinic. The answering service picked up and said the vet wouldn't be available until 9. Michael swore under his breath and tried one more number. Sarah Whitmore, the wildlife biologist he'd met a few times when delivering supplies. She'd given him her card once, told him to call if he ever saw anything unusual in the forest. She answered on the 4th ring, her voice thick with sleep. "Hello? Sarah, it's Michael Chen. I deliver supplies to the center. I'm sorry to call so early, but I need help. I found a pregnant fox caught in a trap. She's badly hurt. There's a baby with her. I don't know what to do." There was a pause. Then Sarah's voice sharpened, suddenly alert. "Where are you?" "Pinewood Forest. About 3 miles past the center, near the old logging road. I'll be there in 20 minutes. Don't move her, unless you absolutely have to. Keep her warm and calm." "Okay, thank you." Michael hung up and drove back to where he'd parked originally, then grabbed an old blanket from behind the seat and jogged back into the forest. By the time he reached the ravine again, the sun was starting to filter through the trees in pale golden streaks. The baby fox heard him coming and stood up, alert, but didn't run. Michael climbed down carefully and draped the blanket over the mother fox. She didn't react. Her eyes were closed now, her breathing shallow. The makeshift bandage around her leg was soaked through with blood. The baby fox sniffed at Michael's hand, then sat down beside him. It was a strange moment. Quiet, fragile, almost sacred. Michael had never been this close to a wild animal. Not like this. He'd always thought of wildlife as something distant, something you observed from a safe distance or watched on a screen. But here, kneeling in the dirt beside this injured mother and her frightened baby, he felt something shift inside him. A sense of responsibility, a connection. "Your mom's gonna be okay," Michael said softly, reaching out slowly to touch the baby's head. The fox flinched, but didn't pull away. Its fur was coarse and damp. "We're going to help her." The baby fox leaned into his hand just slightly and closed its eyes. Sarah Whitmore arrived 18 minutes later, carrying a canvas bag and wearing hiking boots that looked like they'd seen 1,000 trails. She was in her mid-30s, with short dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail and sharp, assessing eyes. Michael met her at the road and led her quickly to the ravine. Sarah knelt beside the mother fox immediately, her hands moving with practiced efficiency. She checked the pulse, examined the wound, gently pressed on the swollen belly. Her face was calm, professional, but Michael saw the tightness around her mouth. "She's in labor," Sarah said quietly. "Early labor. The stress from the trap probably triggered it." Michael's stomach dropped. "Is she going to make it?" "I don't know. She's lost a lot of blood, and she's exhausted. We need to get her to my clinic, but moving her is risky." Sarah pulled a syringe and a small vial from her bag. "I'm going to give her something for the pain and to slow the labor. Then we'll stabilize her and transport her as gently as possible." She administered the injection with steady hands, then wrapped the mother's leg in proper gauze and applied a lightweight splint. The baby fox watched every movement, its body tense, ready to bolt but unwilling to leave its mother. "That's her kit," Sarah said, nodding toward the baby. "Probably from last year's litter. Young foxes usually disperse by now, but sometimes one will stay close if the mother is expecting again." "He brought me here," Michael said. "He came out onto the road and made me follow him." Sarah glanced up at him, her expression unreadable. "Foxes are intelligent, and they understand when they need help." She finished securing the splint and sat back. "We'll need to carry her together. You take the front. I'll take the back. Move slowly. The kit will follow." They lifted the mother fox onto the blanket, using it as a makeshift stretcher. She made a weak sound of protest, but didn't struggle. Michael's arms burned as they navigated the uneven terrain, stepping carefully over roots and stones, trying not to jostle her too much. The baby fox trotted alongside them, never more than a few feet away, its eyes fixed on its mother. It took nearly 15 minutes to reach the road. Sarah's truck was a rugged old pickup with a camper shell. She'd already laid out blankets in the back. They placed the mother fox inside, and the baby jumped in immediately, curling up beside her. "I'll take them to my clinic," Sarah said, closing the camper shell. "It's about 40 minutes from here. You can follow if you want." "I do," Michael said, without hesitation. Sarah nodded. "Good. She's going to need all the support she can get." The clinic was a small, converted barn on the edge of Sarah's property, surrounded by fields and backed by a dense line of trees. Inside, it was clean and organized. Examination tables, medical equipment, cages of various sizes along one wall. Sarah worked quickly, transferring the mother fox to a padded enclosure and hooking up an IV line to combat the dehydration and blood loss. The baby fox refused to leave her side. Every time Sarah tried to gently coax him away, he would flatten his ears and press closer to his mother. "Let him stay," Michael said. "He's scared." Sarah hesitated, then nodded. "All right, but if she goes into active labor, I'll need to move him." Michael stood by the enclosure watching. His shift at the education center had started an hour ago, but he didn't care. He sent a quick text to his supervisor explaining the situation, then turned his phone to silent. Sarah cleaned and sutured the wound on the mother fox's leg, her hands steady, despite the delicate work. "The trap did a lot of damage," she said quietly. "Tendon damage, possible fracture. Even if she survives, she may not be able to hunt properly again. What happens then? Michael asked. If she can't be released back into the wild, I'll have to find a sanctuary that can take her, assuming she and the kits survive. Kits? Plural? Foxes usually have 4 to 6 per litter. Sarah glanced at the mother's swollen belly. She's carrying at least 3, maybe more. Michael felt a weight settle in his chest. 3 or more lives hanging in the balance, and one frightened baby who'd had the courage to ask a stranger for help. He looked down at the kit, who was resting his head on his mother's side, eyes half closed. Michael reached through the bars and gently stroked his head. The fox didn't pull away this time. He just closed his eyes and let out a long, shuddering breath. "You did good," Michael whispered. "You saved her." Outside, the morning sun climbed higher, filling the clinic with warm light. Sarah worked in focused silence, adjusting the IV, monitoring vital signs, preparing for what might come next. The mother fox's breathing steadied slightly, the medication taking effect. And for the first time since Michael had stopped his truck on that cold road, he allowed himself to hope. The mother fox went into active labor just after noon. Michael had been sitting on a wooden stool beside the enclosure for nearly 3 hours, watching her breathe, watching the baby fox refuse to eat the food Sarah had offered him. The kit just stayed pressed against his mother, occasionally licking her face or whimpering softly. Sarah moved in and out of the room, checking monitors, making notes, speaking in low, calm tones on the phone with another wildlife veterinarian 2 counties over. Then the mother's body tensed. Her breathing changed, faster, shallower. She lifted her head slightly and let out a low, pained sound. "Sarah," Michael called, standing up. Sarah was beside him in seconds. She observed for a moment, then nodded. "It's starting. Michael, I need you to take the kit out of the enclosure." "He won't go." "You have to try. I can't have him in there during the delivery. He could get hurt, or he could stress her out more." Michael opened the enclosure door slowly and reached in. The baby fox's ears went flat, and he pressed himself tighter against his mother. "Come on, buddy," Michael said softly. "Let her do what she needs to do. I'll be right here." He managed to get his hands around the kit's small body and lifted him gently. The fox squirmed and let out a series of sharp, distressed barks. The mother fox raised her head, her eyes locking onto her baby, and made a sound, something between a whine and a growl, weak but desperate. Michael's chest tightened. He held the kit close to his chest, feeling the rapid thump of its heart, and stepped back. The baby fox continued to cry out, struggling in his arms. "It's okay," Michael whispered, stroking the kit's head. "It's okay. She's right there. You can see her." Sarah closed the enclosure door and began preparing the space, laying out towels, warming lamps, medical instruments. She worked with focused precision, her face set in concentration. The mother fox's contractions were coming faster now, her body straining with each one. The baby fox went still in Michael's arms, watching. His whole body was tense, trembling. Michael sat back down on the stool, cradling the kit, murmuring quiet reassurances that he wasn't sure either of them believed. The first kit was born 20 minutes later, a tiny, wet, dark shape that Sarah quickly toweled off and placed near the mother's belly. The mother fox, despite her exhaustion, immediately began licking the newborn, stimulating its breathing. A faint, mewling sound filled the room. The baby fox in Michael's arms perked up, his ears swiveling forward. "One down," Sarah murmured, watching closely. "Come on, Mama. You can do this." The second kit came 10 minutes after that, then the third. Each time, Sarah worked quickly to clear airways, dry the newborns, make sure they were breathing. The mother fox, despite everything, the injury, the blood loss, the trauma, continued to tend to each one, nudging them toward her belly to nurse. But the fourth kit was different. When it emerged, it was smaller than the others and it didn't move. Sarah picked it up immediately, rubbing it vigorously with a towel, trying to stimulate a response. Nothing. She opened its tiny mouth, cleared the airways, rubbed harder. Still nothing. "Come on," Sarah whispered urgently. "Come on, breathe." Michael held his breath. The baby fox in his arms had gone completely still, as if he understood what was happening. Sarah brought the kit close to her face and gave 2 gentle rescue breaths, then continued rubbing. 5 seconds, 10, 15, and then a tiny gasp, a small, fragile sound. The kit's chest began to rise and fall in shallow, irregular breaths. Sarah closed her eyes briefly, relief washing over her face. She placed the kit with its siblings, and the mother fox immediately began licking it, more urgently than the others. "That was close," Sarah said quietly, sitting back on her heels. Her hands were shaking slightly. Michael realized he'd been holding the baby fox so tightly the poor animal was squirming. He loosened his grip. "Is that it? 4?" Sarah palpated the mother's belly gently. "I think so. Yes. 4 kits." She checked the IV line, adjusted the flow, then finally sat down on the floor, her back against the wall. She looked exhausted. She did it. Against all odds, she did it. Michael looked at the mother fox, her sides heaving, her eyes half closed, but her body curved protectively around her 4 newborns. They were nursing now, tiny and helpless, their eyes sealed shut, their bodies pink and wrinkled beneath thin fur. "Can I put him back in now?" Michael asked, nodding to the kit in his arms. Sarah nodded. "Yes, slowly." Michael opened the enclosure and set the baby fox down gently. The kit immediately scrambled over to his mother, sniffing at her, at his new siblings. The mother fox lifted her head weakly and touched her nose to his. It was a brief gesture, but unmistakable. Recognition, reassurance, love. The baby fox settled down beside her, not touching the newborns, but close enough to be part of the family unit. He rested his head on his paws, and finally, for the first time since Michael had met him, closed his eyes. Sarah made coffee, and they sat together in the small office adjacent to the clinic room, the door left open so they could keep watch. It was mid-afternoon now. The adrenaline was fading, leaving Michael feeling hollowed out and heavy. "You did something remarkable today," Sarah said, wrapping her hands around her mug. "Most people would have driven past." "I almost did," Michael admitted. "If he hadn't stood in the road like that, if he hadn't looked at me—" He trailed off, shaking his head. "I've never seen anything like it." "Desperation drives animals to take incredible risks," Sarah said. "That kit understood that his mother was dying, and he understood that his only chance was to find help. It's rare, but it happens. I've heard stories, dogs leading people to injured owners, dolphins guiding boats to swimmers in distress. Intelligence and love aren't exclusive to humans." Michael stared into his coffee. "Who sets traps like that? I thought they were illegal." Sarah's expression darkened. "They are. Leg hold traps have been banned in this state since 2008. But there are still people who use them, poachers mostly, or people who see wildlife as pests rather than living beings. They set the traps and forget about them, or they don't care enough to check regularly." She paused, her jaw tight. "I've been finding more of them in the last year. That's the 4th trap injury I've treated in 6 months." 4? Michael felt a surge of anger. "Someone's been setting them deliberately?" "I think so. The Forest Service knows. But they don't have the resources to patrol the entire area. And the traps are hidden well, buried under leaves, set off the main trails. By the time an animal is caught, it's usually too late." She looked toward the enclosure, where the mother fox was resting with her kits. "She's lucky. Most don't survive long enough to be found." Michael thought about the baby fox standing in the road, trembling, begging. He knew she didn't have much time. "He saved her life," Sarah said quietly. "And you saved them both." They sat in silence for a moment. Outside, the wind picked up, rustling through the trees. The clinic was warm and quiet, filled with the soft sounds of breathing. "What happens now?" Michael asked. "Can she be released?" Sarah sighed. "Not anytime soon. The leg will take weeks to heal, maybe months, and even then, there's no guarantee she'll be able to hunt effectively. Foxes rely on speed and agility to catch prey. Rabbits, voles, birds. If she's limping, if she can't run properly, she won't survive in the wild. She paused. And she has 5 mouths to feed now, 4 newborns and the older Kit. He's not going to leave her, is he? No, Sarah said. He'll stay as long as she lets him. Fox families are more social than people think, especially when times are hard. He'll help however he can. Michael set down his mug. What can I do? Sarah looked at him, surprised. You've already done more than most people would. That's not enough, Michael said. Something had shifted in him over the course of this day, something he couldn't quite name, but could feel settling into place. Like a piece of himself he hadn't known was missing. I want to help, whatever she needs. Whatever they need. Sarah studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. All right. The first thing she needs is food. She's going to be ravenous once she regains her strength. She's nursing 4 Kits and recovering from trauma. I'll need fresh meat, supplements, and someone to check on them regularly. I can do that, Michael said immediately. I drive this route 3 times a week. I can stop by, bring whatever you need. It's a commitment, Sarah warned. Could be months. I know. Sarah smiled, a small, genuine smile. Okay then, welcome to Wildlife Rehabilitation, Michael Chen. As the sun began to set, casting long orange shadows across the clinic, Michael stood by the enclosure one more time. The mother fox was sleeping, her body curved protectively around the 4 newborns. The baby fox, the one who had saved them all, was awake, watching Michael with those amber eyes. Michael reached through the bars and gently scratched behind the Kit's ears. The fox leaned into the touch, eyes half closing. You're a hero, you know that? Michael whispered. A real hero. The Kit made a soft sound, something between a chirp and a sigh. Outside, the forest was darkening, the first stars beginning to appear in the cold March sky. Somewhere out there, more traps were waiting, more animals at risk. But here, in this small converted barn, 5 foxes were safe, alive, together. And for now, that was enough. Michael returned to the clinic the next morning with a cooler full of raw chicken, ground turkey, and supplements Sarah had texted him to buy. He'd barely slept. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the mother fox lying in that trap, saw the baby fox standing in the road, begging. Sarah met him at the door, looking more rested than she had yesterday. They made it through the night, she said, taking the cooler. All of them. The mother's vitals are stable and the Kits are nursing well. Relief flooded through Michael. And the older Kit still hasn't left her side. He's not eating as much as I'd like, but that's normal. Stress, unfamiliar environment. He'll come around. She led him inside. Come see. The enclosure had been expanded overnight. Sarah had connected it to a larger pen, giving the family more space. The mother fox was awake, lying on her side, while the 4 newborns nursed. The older Kit sat a few feet away, grooming himself but keeping constant watch over his family. When Michael approached, the Kit's ears perked up. He stood and trotted over to the bars, making a soft chirping sound. He remembers you, Sarah said, surprised. That's remarkable. Usually foxes stay wary of humans even after rescue. Michael knelt down and extended his fingers through the bars. The Kit sniffed them, then pressed his head against Michael's hand. The gesture was unmistakable. Trust. I think he knows you saved them, Sarah said quietly. Michael felt something catch in his throat. We both did. Over the next 2 weeks, Michael's life developed a new rhythm. 3 times a week, he'd drive his delivery route. But now he always left an hour early to stop at Sarah's clinic. He'd bring food, help clean the enclosures, sit quietly and watch the fox family while Sarah examined them or updated her notes. The mother fox, Sarah had started calling her Ember for her rust-colored fur, was recovering faster than expected. The wound on her leg was healing, though she still limped noticeably. Her maternal instincts were fierce and complete. She groomed her Kits constantly, moved them gently with her mouth when they wandered too far, and ate voraciously to keep up her milk supply. The 4 newborns grew rapidly. Their eyes opened after 2 weeks, revealing bright blue irises that would later turn amber. They began stumbling around the enclosure on unsteady legs, play-fighting with each other, pouncing on their older brother's tail. The older Kit, Michael had started calling him Scout, was an attentive sibling. He let the babies climb on him, tolerated their needle-sharp teeth on his ears, and would gently nudge them back toward Ember when they wandered too far. But Michael noticed something else. Scout would often sit by the enclosure door, staring out toward the windows, toward the forest beyond. "He wants to go back," Michael said one morning, watching Scout pace near the door. Sarah nodded. "He's a wild animal. This isn't natural for him, being confined, being around humans. But he won't leave while his mother and siblings need him. Will they be able to go back? All of them?" Sarah was quiet for a moment, measuring powdered supplements into Ember's food. "I don't know. Ember's leg is healing, but she's still limping. I've been watching her move around the enclosure. She can walk, even trot a little, but she can't run at full speed. And foxes need to run. For hunting, for escaping predators, for survival." She set down the measuring cup. "I'm going to give her another month. Let her build up strength, see how much function she regains. But if she can't hunt—" "A sanctuary," Michael said. "Yes. There's one about 4 hours north. They take non-releasable wildlife, give them permanent homes, good people, good facilities, but—" Sarah trailed off. "But it's not the wild," Michael finished. "No, it's not." That afternoon, while Sarah was on a call with the Forest Service, Michael sat beside the enclosure with his laptop, catching up on work emails. Scout approached the bars and sat down directly across from him, watching intently. "What do you think?" Michael asked softly. "Should I respond to this email or just delete it?" Scout tilted his head, ears forward. "Yeah, you're right. Delete." Michael closed the laptop. "You're smarter than most of my co-workers." Scout made a soft sound, almost like a laugh, a quick exhalation through his nose. Michael smiled. Over the past 2 weeks, he'd learned to read Scout's body language, the position of his ears, the set of his tail, the subtle shifts in posture that indicated curiosity, anxiety, contentment. It was like learning a new language, and Scout, in turn, had learned that Michael was safe. Not pack, not family, but something, an ally. Sarah emerged from her office, her expression tight. "What's wrong?" Michael asked. "The Forest Service found 3 more traps this morning. One had a juvenile deer in it, had been there for at least 2 days. It didn't make it." Her hands clenched into fists. "This is deliberate, Michael. Someone is systematically trapping that forest, and they don't care what they catch or how much suffering they cause." Michael stood up, anger flaring hot in his chest. "Can't they track who's doing it?" "They're trying. But the traps are old, unmarked, and scattered over miles of forest. No trail cameras have caught anything. Whoever it is knows the forest well and knows how to avoid detection. There has to be something we can do." Sarah looked at him, then at the enclosure where Ember was grooming her kits. "Actually," she said slowly, "there might be." 2 days later, Michael found himself standing in the Forest Service office, surrounded by maps and satellite images. Sarah was there, along with Ranger Tom Whitfield, a weathered man in his 50s with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor, and Jessica Park, a young wildlife technician with a camera slung around her neck. "We've been documenting trap locations for the past 6 months, Tom said, marking red X's on a large topographical map spread across the table. "At first we thought it was random, old traps left over from before the ban, but the pattern suggests otherwise." Michael studied the map. The red X's formed a rough arc through the forest, concentrated in areas far from the main trails but close to game corridors, natural pathways animals used for travel. "Whoever's setting these knows wildlife behavior," Jessica said. "They're targeting high-traffic areas deliberately." "Have you found any physical evidence?" Sarah asked. "Footprints, tool marks, anything that could identify the trapper?" Tom shook his head. "They're careful. They wear gloves, cover their tracks, set the traps during weather events when rain washes away evidence. We've found boot prints a few times, but nothing distinctive enough to trace." "So what's the plan?" Michael asked. Tom leaned back in his chair. We're increasing patrols, but we're understaffed. 3 rangers covering 200 square miles. It's not enough. He looked at Sarah. That's where you come in. I know you have volunteers who hike these trails regularly. If we could train them to spot and report traps without touching them, we could cover more ground. I can organize that, Sarah said immediately. I have a network of wildlife enthusiasts, hikers, photographers. Give me a week. Good. Tom turned to Michael. And you? You drive that forest road 3 times a week, right? Different times of day? Yes. I want you to keep your eyes open. Parked vehicles that don't belong, people off-trail with equipment, anything unusual. Take photos if you can, but don't approach. If this person realizes we're onto them, they'll just move to a different area. Michael nodded, his jaw set. I'll watch. That night, Michael sat in his apartment, staring at the map he'd photographed on his phone. The red X's seemed to burn against the green topography. Somewhere out there, more animals were at risk. More families could be torn apart. He thought about Ember, limping around her enclosure, trying to be strong for her kits. He thought about Scout, standing in the road begging a stranger for help because he understood that time was running out. Michael had spent most of his life moving through the world without really seeing it, driving the same routes, doing the same jobs, existing in a comfortable bubble of routine. But that morning 2 weeks ago, when he'd stopped his truck and looked into Scout's desperate eyes, something had cracked open inside him. A door he hadn't known was closed. He couldn't go back to not seeing, not now. His phone buzzed. A text from Sarah. Ember walked across the entire enclosure tonight without limping. First time since the injury. Thought you'd want to know. Michael smiled, a cautious hope blooming in his chest. Maybe she'd make it. Maybe they all would. He texted back, "That's amazing. I'll stop by tomorrow morning." Then he pulled up the map again, studying the pattern of traps, memorizing the locations. He had deliveries to make, a route to drive. But now he had something else too, a purpose, a reason to pay attention. Outside his window, the city lights glittered against the dark. But beyond them, past the suburbs and strip malls and highways, the forest waited, vast and wild and full of life. And somewhere in that forest, a trapper was waiting too. But now, Michael was watching. 3 weeks after Ember's rescue, Michael was driving his usual route through Pinewood Forest when he saw the truck. It was parked on a narrow logging road that branched off from the main route, a faded blue pickup with mud-caked wheel wells and a dented tailgate. Michael had driven past this spot dozens of times and never seen a vehicle here. The road led nowhere, just deeper into the forest toward an abandoned ranger station that hadn't been used in years. He slowed down, his heart rate picking up. Tom's words echoed in his mind. Parked vehicles that don't belong. Michael pulled over about 50 yards past the turnoff and reached for his phone. But when he checked, there was no signal. This was one of the dead zones that plagued the forest. He'd have to drive another 2 miles to get reception. He should just leave. Drive to where he could call Tom, report the vehicle, let the authorities handle it. But something stopped him. What if this person was setting traps right now? What if another animal was about to suffer the same fate as Ember? Or worse. Michael looked at the empty road ahead, then back at the logging road. He thought about Scout standing in the middle of the road, terrified but determined. Sometimes you couldn't wait for someone else to help. Sometimes you had to act. He made a decision. Michael turned his truck around and parked it well off the main road, hidden behind a thick stand of pines. He grabbed his phone, useless for calls, but the camera still worked, and a tire iron from the back. Not as a weapon, he told himself, just in case. Then he started walking. The logging road was overgrown, brambles reaching across the path. Michael moved carefully, trying to step on roots and rocks to minimize the sound of his footfalls. The forest was thick here, the canopy dense overhead. Shafts of afternoon sunlight pierced through in golden columns, illuminating floating dust and pollen. After about a quarter-mile, he heard voices. Michael froze, then moved quietly off the path and crouched behind a fallen log covered in moss. He could see movement through the trees. 2 figures, maybe 30 yards ahead. The first was a man in his 60s, lean and weathered, wearing camouflage pants and a worn hunting jacket. He was kneeling on the ground, his hands working at something Michael couldn't quite see. The second was younger, maybe mid-30s, with a scraggly beard and a baseball cap pulled low. He stood watch, hands in his pockets, scanning the forest with the casual alertness of someone who'd done this many times before. "How many more you got?" the younger man asked. 6, the older man replied, his voice rough like gravel. "Set these right. We'll have a decent haul by next week. Forest Service has been sniffing around. They always are. Never find anything." The older man stood up, brushing dirt from his knees. In his hands was a leg-hold trap, its metal jaws open and ready. "These trails are loaded with game. Foxes, raccoons, sometimes a bobcat if we're lucky. People pay good money for pelts." Michael's blood ran cold. These weren't forgotten traps from years ago. This was active, deliberate poaching. The older man moved to a spot near the base of a large oak tree and began digging, creating a shallow depression in the earth. He placed the trap carefully, then covered it with leaves and forest debris, making it nearly invisible. The younger man handed him a small bottle. Scent lure, Michael realized. Something to attract animals to the exact spot where the trap waited. They were efficient, practiced. They'd done this hundreds of times. Michael's hands were shaking. He needed to get photos, evidence that could identify these men and prove what they were doing. Slowly, carefully, he raised his phone and started recording video. The older man moved to another spot about 20 feet away and began the process again. Michael captured it all: the trap, the covering, the scent lure. The men's faces were partially visible in profile. It wasn't perfect, but it might be enough. Then a branch snapped under Michael's knee. The sound was sharp in the quiet forest. Both men's heads whipped around. "Someone's here," the younger man said, his voice suddenly hard. Michael's heart hammered against his ribs. He pressed himself flat against the log, praying they hadn't pinpointed his location. "Probably just a deer," the older man said, but his tone was wary. "Deer don't snap branches like that." The older man straightened, reaching into his jacket. When his hand emerged, it was holding something that made Michael's stomach drop. A hunting knife, the blade easily 6 inches long. "Check it out," the older man said quietly. The younger man began walking toward Michael's hiding spot, his steps deliberate, his eyes scanning the underbrush. Michael's mind raced. He couldn't outrun them. They knew this forest better than he did. He couldn't fight them. Not 2 of them, one with a knife. Think. The younger man was 15 yards away now, 10. Michael did the only thing he could think of. He stood up, holding his phone high where they could see it. "I've already sent the video," he said, his voice steadier than he felt. It was a lie, but they didn't know that. "Forest Service is on their way." The younger man stopped, surprised. The older man's eyes narrowed, calculating. "The hell are you doing out here?" the older man demanded. "Hiking," Michael said, "and documenting wildlife crimes. Those traps are illegal. You know that." "You got no proof of anything," the younger man said, but there was uncertainty in his voice now. "I have video of you setting those traps, your faces, your vehicle, everything." Michael's heart was pounding so hard he thought they must be able to hear it. "You can leave now, or you can explain it to the ranger who's coming." The older man took a step forward, still holding the knife. "Give me that phone." "No." They stared at each other across the forest floor. Michael could see the man weighing his options. Take the phone by force, destroy the evidence, maybe ensure Michael couldn't report what he'd seen. It would be easy. No witnesses. Just another hiking accident in the deep woods. But then something unexpected happened. A sound echoed through the forest, a sharp staccato bark. Then another, and another. Fox calls. The older man's head turned toward the sound, distracted. Michael's eyes widened. He knew that bark. He'd heard it before. Through the trees, a flash of rust-colored fur. Then another. Scout appeared at the edge of the clearing, his body tense, his tail bushed out to twice its normal size. He barked again, aggressive and warning, and behind him, moving through the undergrowth, were more foxes. Michael counted 4 adults. They'd been drawn by Scout's calls, or maybe they lived in this area, their territory threatened by these traps. The foxes didn't attack, but they spread out in a loose semicircle, their eyes fixed on the two men. More barking, a chorus of sharp warnings. One of the foxes, a large male with a scarred ear, lowered his head and made a sound like a growl cough. A threat display Michael had only read about. "What the hell?" the younger man breathed, taking a step back. The older man's confidence was cracking. He wasn't scared of foxes. They were too small to be a real threat, but the situation had shifted. Too many unknowns, too much noise. And in that moment of hesitation, Michael heard the most beautiful sound in the world, the distant rumble of an engine. Then voices calling through the trees. "Michael, Forest Service, call out if you can hear us." It was Tom's voice. Relief flooded through Michael so intensely his knees nearly buckled. "Here!" he shouted. "I'm here! 2 suspects, armed!" The older man swore viciously. He looked at his partner, at the approaching voices, at the foxes still barking in the underbrush. Then he made his decision. "Go!" he snapped. Both men turned and ran, crashing through the forest toward their truck. Scout darted after them for a few yards, barking furiously, then stopped and looked back at Michael. Within 30 seconds, Tom and 2 other rangers emerged from the trees, hands on their sidearms. Jessica was with them, her camera already recording. "Michael, are you hurt?" Tom called. "I'm fine," Michael said, his voice shaking now that the danger had passed. "But they're getting away. Blue pickup parked on the old logging road." Tom spoke quickly into his radio, directing units to intercept. Then he approached Michael, his expression caught between relief and frustration. "What the hell were you thinking confronting them alone?" "I got video," Michael said, holding up his phone. "They were setting traps, at least 6. I recorded everything." Tom's expression shifted. He took the phone carefully, watched the video, then looked at Michael with something like respect. "This is good. Real good. We can identify them, track the vehicle, and we've got them on camera committing the crime." He handed the phone back. "But Jesus, Michael, that was dangerous and stupid." "I know," Michael admitted. His hands were still trembling. "But I couldn't just let them keep doing this." Jessica was already moving through the area with her camera, documenting the newly set traps. "Found one," she called. Then, moments later, "Another one here." Tom squeezed Michael's shoulder. "You did good. Reckless, but good." He turned to the other rangers. "Let's get these traps cleared and documented, and get an APB out on that truck." As the rangers began their work, Michael looked around for Scout. The other foxes had vanished back into the forest, melting away like shadows. But Scout remained, sitting about 15 feet away, watching Michael with those intelligent amber eyes. Michael walked slowly toward him and crouched down. "Did you follow me?" he asked softly. "Did you know I needed help?" Scout tilted his head, ears forward. Then he stood, took 2 steps toward Michael, and touched his nose briefly to Michael's outstretched fingers. It was the lightest contact, barely a second, but it said everything. Then Scout turned and trotted back into the forest, his tail held high, disappearing into the dappled shadows between the trees. Michael stayed crouched there for a long moment, his heart full of something he couldn't quite name. Gratitude, maybe, or kinship. The sense that he'd been part of something larger than himself. A moment when the barrier between species had dissolved, when 2 creatures had understood each other perfectly and acted together against a common threat. "Michael!" Tom called. "We need your statement." Michael stood up, brushing dirt from his jeans, and walked back toward the rangers. Behind him, deep in the forest, a fox barked once, a sound like laughter or triumph or simply, "Thank you." The 2 men were arrested within 40 minutes. A state trooper had spotted the blue pickup speeding out of the forest and pulled it over 3 miles from where Michael had confronted them. When the rangers arrived with Tom's description and Michael's video evidence, the men had tried to claim they were just hiking, but their truck bed told a different story. 8 more leg-hold traps, skinning knives, bags of scent lure, and a cooler that contained 3 fox pelts. Tom called Michael that evening with the news. Michael was at Sarah's clinic helping clean enclosures when his phone rang. "We got them," Tom said without preamble. "Leonard Price and his son, Dale. Leonard's been on our radar for years. Suspected poaching, illegal trapping, but we could never catch him in the act. Your video is ironclad evidence. The district attorney says they're looking at multiple felony counts, plus civil penalties." Michael sat down heavily on a supply crate, the weight of the day finally hitting him. "How many animals do they think, based on what we found in their truck and on their property?" "Dozens, maybe more. They've been doing this for years." Tom's voice was grim. "But because of you, they're done. That forest is going to be a lot safer now." After he hung up, Michael just sat there staring at nothing. Sarah emerged from the clinic room and took one look at his face. "You okay?" she asked gently. "I don't know," Michael said honestly. "I keep thinking about what could have happened if those foxes hadn't shown up, if you and Tom hadn't found me when you did." He looked up at her. "How did you even know where I was?" Sarah sat down beside him. "Scout. He showed up at the clinic around noon, agitated, barking at the door. I'd never seen him leave the enclosure before. He must have squeezed through a gap I didn't know existed. He wouldn't calm down, just kept running toward the road and coming back. I called Tom, told him something was wrong. We tracked your truck's location. You'd shared it with me, remember? And when we saw it parked on that side road..." She shook her head. "Scout led us the rest of the way, straight to you." Michael's throat tightened. "He came to get help. Again. He's remarkable," Sarah said quietly. "I've worked with wildlife for 15 years, and I've never seen behavior quite like his. That level of reasoning, of understanding cause and effect, it's extraordinary." "Can I see them?" Michael asked. "The family?" Sarah nodded and led him to the enclosure. Ember was lying on her side, the 4 kits tumbling over each other nearby. They were 8 weeks old now, their eyes fully open, their fur thick and fluffy. They looked like small, perfect versions of their mother. Rust-colored coats, black legs, white-tipped tails. One of them was attempting to stalk a fallen leaf, its rear end wiggling comically before it pounced, but it was Scout that Michael's eyes found first. The young fox was resting near the door, grooming his paw, but when Michael approached, he stood immediately and came to the bars. His tail wagged, just slightly, the way it had started to when he saw Michael. "Hey, buddy," Michael said softly, kneeling down. "I heard what you did. You saved me." Scout pressed his face against the bars, and Michael reached through to scratch behind his ears. The fox's eyes closed, a soft rumbling sound emerging from his throat, not quite a purr, but something like contentment. "We make a pretty good team," Michael whispered. Sarah crouched beside him, watching the interaction with a thoughtful expression. "I need to talk to you about something," she said. "About their future." Michael's hand stilled. "Okay." Ember's leg has healed remarkably well. She's not limping anymore. She can run, jump, climb. I've been testing her in the larger outdoor enclosure, giving her live prey to hunt, small things, mice and voles, and she's catching them. Sarah's voice was cautious but hopeful. "I think she can be released." Relief and something else, something bittersweet, washed through Michael. "That's incredible. When?" "Another 2 weeks, maybe 3. The kits need a bit more time to develop their hunting skills. Scout can help teach them. He's already been bringing them pieces of food, showing them how to cache it, basic survival behaviors." She paused. "But Michael, there's something you need to understand. Once they're released, they'll be wild again. Scout, especially. He's bonded with you more than any wild animal should bond with a human. When he goes back to the forest, he needs to remember that humans are dangerous, that he can't trust them." Michael felt something twist in his chest. "You're saying I can't see him anymore? I'm saying you shouldn't seek him out. For his own safety, if he approaches you, which he might, you can't encourage it. You can't feed him or interact with him the way you have been." Sarah's eyes were kind but firm. "He needs to be a fox, Michael. Not a pet, not a friend. A wild animal with wild instincts." Michael looked at Scout, who was watching him with those intelligent eyes, and felt a grief he hadn't expected. He'd known this day would come. Had known from the beginning that the goal was always to return them to the wild, but knowing it intellectually and feeling it emotionally were two different things. "I understand," he said quietly. Over the next 2 weeks, Michael visited the clinic every day. He told himself it was to help Sarah with the preparations for release, with the feeding schedules and enclosure maintenance. But really, it was to spend time with Scout. He watched the young fox teach his siblings how to pounce, how to dig, how to be wary of sudden movements. Scout was patient with them, tolerant of their clumsy attempts, but Michael could see the restlessness growing in him. The way he'd stare out through the enclosure fence toward the forest, the way he'd pace at dawn and dusk when wild foxes would normally be most active. He was ready to go home. One evening, a week before the planned release, Michael sat outside the enclosure as the sun set. The kits were sleeping in a pile, Ember grooming them one by one. Scout sat beside Michael, separated only by the chain-link fence, both of them watching the sky turn from gold to pink to deep purple. "I'm going to miss you," Michael said softly. "I know you probably don't understand that, but it's true. You changed my life, Scout. You made me pay attention. You made me care." He swallowed hard. "I hope you have a good life out there. I hope you're safe. I hope—" His voice broke slightly. "I hope you remember that not all humans are bad." Scout made a soft sound, that little chirp sigh he always made when Michael spoke to him. Then he did something he'd never done before. He lay down, pressed against the fence, his body aligned with where Michael sat on the other side. They stayed like that until full dark, separated by metal but somehow together, while stars emerged overhead and the forest whispered with nocturnal life. The day of the release arrived cold and clear, the late April air sharp with the scent of pine and new growth. Sarah had chosen a location 3 miles from where Ember had been trapped, far enough from the old territory but still within the forest she knew. The area was rich with prey, had good den sites, and was far from any roads or human activity. Tom and Jessica were there to document the release and to do a final sweep for any remaining traps. Michael had taken the day off work. He wouldn't have missed this for anything. They transported the Fox family in large, breathable crates, driving slowly over the forest roads. Sarah had explained the protocol. They'd open the crates and step back, let the foxes emerge on their own terms, give them space to orient themselves. When they reached the release site, a small clearing near a rocky outcropping perfect for denning, Sarah and Michael carried the crates into the center and carefully opened the doors. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then Ember emerged, cautious, her nose working to process 1,000 scents. She took several steps into the clearing, testing her healed leg, looking around with sharp, assessing eyes. The 4 kits tumbled out after her, excited and curious, immediately beginning to explore. But Scout remained in the crate, visible in the shadows, but unmoving. Michael's heart ached. "Come on, buddy," he whispered. "You're home." Sarah touched his arm gently. "Give him time." They waited. Minutes passed. Ember called to Scout, a soft sound that was half whine, half bark. The kits tumbled around in the new grass, chasing insects, completely unaware of the significance of the moment. And then, finally, Scout emerged. He stepped into the clearing slowly, his body low, every sense alert. He looked at the forest, his forest, and something in his posture changed. His tail came up, his ears swiveled, catching sounds Michael couldn't hear. He was transforming before their eyes, the domestic familiarity falling away, the wild creature emerging. But before he disappeared into the trees, Scout turned. His eyes found Michael across the clearing, and they looked at each other one last time. Michael raised his hand, not quite a wave, just an acknowledgement, a goodbye. Scout held his gaze for 3 heartbeats. Then he turned and trotted into the forest, his tail flashing white in the shadows. Ember and the kits followed, and within seconds they had vanished completely, as if they'd never been there at all. The clearing was empty except for the humans, standing in silence. Sarah put her arm around Michael's shoulders. "You did good," she said quietly. "You gave them a second chance." Michael nodded, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. He should feel happy. This was the best possible outcome, but all he felt was the hollow space where Scout's presence had been. They packed up the crates and drove back through the forest as the sun climbed higher. Michael looked out the window at the trees sliding past, wondering where the Fox family was now, hoping they were together, hoping they were safe. His phone buzzed. A text from his supervisor. "Heard what you did. Proud of you. Take tomorrow off too if you need it." Michael put the phone away and closed his eyes, letting the rhythm of the road lull him into a state somewhere between sleep and waking. In his mind he saw Scout standing in the road begging for help. Saw the trust in those amber eyes. Saw the moment of goodbye in the clearing. Some encounters changed you. Some connections reached across the barriers of species and circumstance and showed you what you were capable of. The courage, the compassion, the willingness to act when it mattered most. Michael had been sleepwalking through his life before that March morning, but he was awake now, and he would never fall asleep again. Summer came to Pinewood Forest, and with it, a transformation. The news of Leonard and Dale Price's arrest had spread through the local community like wildfire. Their trial became a minor media sensation, local reporters covering the story of illegal trapping, the dramatic confrontation, and the role that a young fox had played in bringing justice to the forest. The judge sentenced Leonard to 18 months in prison, and Dale to a year, along with hefty fines, lifetime hunting and trapping bans, and mandatory restitution to wildlife rehabilitation programs. But more than the legal victory, something else had shifted. People were paying attention now. Sarah's volunteer program had swelled from a handful of hikers to over 40 trained spotters who regularly patrolled the forest trails. In 3 months, they'd found and reported 12 more illegal traps, some dating back years, others recently set by copycats who didn't realize the Forest Service was now actively monitoring. Every trap removed was another life potentially saved. Michael's delivery route had become something different too. He still made his scheduled stops at the outdoor education center, but now he also volunteered with Sarah twice a week, helping with intake assessments for injured wildlife, maintaining enclosures, and teaching basic wildlife first aid to the new volunteers. His apartment had developed a peculiar collection: field guides to North American mammals, books on animal behavior, maps of the forest marked with wildlife corridors and den sites. His friends thought he'd lost his mind. His parents worried he was having some kind of quarter-life crisis, but Michael had never felt more certain of anything in his life. He'd found something that mattered, work that felt like purpose rather than obligation. It was late June when Michael saw Scout again. He'd been driving the forest road just after dawn, windows down, the cool morning air filling the truck cab. He wasn't looking for the foxes. Sarah's warnings echoed constantly in his mind, but he couldn't help scanning the forest edge out of habit, watching for movement in the shadows. And there, at the same bend where he'd first encountered Scout 3 months ago, a fox stood at the edge of the road. Michael's heart stopped. He slowed the truck, pulled over, and looked. It was Scout. Older now, his frame filled out, his fur thick and glossy with good health. He stood proud and confident in the early light, no longer the frightened, desperate kit begging for help. He was magnificent, every inch a wild creature, perfectly adapted to his environment. But when he saw Michael's truck, his ears came forward. Recognition. Michael turned off the engine and sat very still, not getting out, not approaching, just watching. Scout took several steps closer, then stopped. His amber eyes were as intelligent as ever, that same piercing gaze that had seen through Michael's hesitation all those months ago and demanded action. They looked at each other across the distance, 15 feet of asphalt, and the unbridgeable gap between domesticity and wilderness. Michael wanted to get out, to call to him, to see if Scout would remember his touch, his voice. But Sarah's words held him back. He needs to be wild. So instead, Michael just raised his hand in that same gesture of acknowledgement he'd given at the release. A silent greeting, a recognition of what they'd shared. Scout's tail moved, just once, a quick wag. Then something rustled in the forest behind him, and Scout's attention snapped away. His posture changed instantly, alert, focused. He glanced back at Michael one more time, and then he turned and vanished into the trees, moving with the liquid grace of an animal completely at home in its world. Michael sat there for a long time after Scout disappeared, his hands resting on the steering wheel, his eyes stinging. It hadn't been a long encounter, 30 seconds, maybe less, but it was enough. Scout was alive, he was healthy, he was wild, and he remembered. That afternoon, Michael met Sarah at the clinic. She'd called him with news, good news for once. "I got confirmation from the sanctuary," she said, pulling up an email on her laptop. "They're taking 2 juveniles next week, the fox with the partial blindness and the raccoon with the neurological damage. Both of them will have permanent, safe homes." "That's wonderful," Michael said, genuinely relieved. He'd helped care for both animals over the past months and had worried about their futures. Sarah leaned back in her chair, studying him. "You've changed, you know, since March." "How so?" "You're present now. When you first started coming here, you were sort of going through the motions of life, working because you had to, existing because that's what people do. But now there's something different, purpose, maybe, direction." She smiled. "It suits you." Michael thought about that. She was right. The old Michael, the one who'd driven past suffering without seeing it, who'd lived inside a comfortable bubble of routine, felt like a stranger now. He couldn't imagine going back to that life. Didn't want to. "I saw Scout this morning," he said quietly, "at the same place where we first met." Sarah's eyebrows rose. And I didn't get out. I didn't try to interact. I just acknowledged him. Let him go." Michael looked at his hands. "It was harder than I thought it would be." But you did it," Sarah said gently. "That's what love looks like sometimes, letting go, allowing the ones we care about to live the lives they're meant to live, even if it means we can't be part of them anymore." Michael nodded, his throat tight. "For what it's worth," Sarah added, "I think he wanted you to know he's okay. That's why he showed himself. Animals understand gratitude too in their own way. He was saying thank you and goodbye." As summer turned to autumn, Michael continued his work with the clinic and the Forest Service. The volunteer patrols had become so effective that illegal trapping in Pinewood Forest had virtually ceased. Word had spread that the area was being watched, and poachers had moved on to easier targets. Tom Whitfield had approached Michael about training to become an official wildlife enforcement volunteer, and Michael had accepted immediately. He'd also started writing about his experiences, blog posts at first, then longer essays that caught the attention of a regional conservation magazine. His article about Scout and the illegal trapping operation was published in September and generated enough interest that Sarah's clinic received a significant donation, enough to expand their facilities and take on additional cases. People reached out to Michael constantly now, strangers who'd read his story, who'd had their own encounters with wildlife, who wanted to help but didn't know how. He responded to every message, sharing resources, offering encouragement, building a community of people who cared. One October evening, Michael stood at the edge of Pinewood Forest as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of amber and gold. The trees were beginning to turn, the leaves shifting from green to red and orange. The air smelled of wood smoke and falling leaves, that distinct scent of autumn taking hold. Somewhere in these woods, Scout was denning down for winter with his family. The 4 kits would be nearly full-grown now, learning the final lessons they'd need to survive on their own. Ember would be teaching them about winter hunting, about conserving energy, about endurance. Michael would never see them again. He was almost certain of that. Scout's appearance in June had been a gift, a moment of closure. But foxes were elusive and the forest was vast. They would live their lives in the wild spaces between human awareness exactly as they should. But Michael would always know they were there, would always remember the morning a desperate kit had stood in the road and begged for help, would always carry the weight and wonder of that moment when 2 species had reached across the divide and understood each other perfectly. That night, Michael sat in his apartment working on a new article. His desk was covered with field notes, photographs, maps. On the wall above his computer hung a single photograph. One Jessica had taken the day of the release. It showed Scout at the edge of the clearing, caught in profile, his body poised between the human world and the wild, his face turned toward the forest. It was the moment of transformation, frozen in time. Michael's phone rang. Sarah. "I know it's late," she said, "but we just got a call. Someone found an injured owl near the highway. Can you meet me there? I could use an extra pair of hands." Michael was already reaching for his jacket. "Send me the location. I'm on my way." He drove through the darkened streets, past the familiar landmarks of his city, toward the edge where civilization met wilderness. His truck's headlights cut through the night, illuminating the road ahead. There would be other animals to save. Other emergencies, other moments where a human hand could make the difference between life and death. The work was never finished, couldn't be finished, not as long as humans and wildlife shared the same world. But every life saved mattered. Every moment of compassion rippled outward in ways Michael was only beginning to understand. A year ago, he'd been asleep, moving through life without really living it. But a small fox with amber eyes had woken him up, had shown him what courage looked like, had demanded that he become more than he'd thought himself capable of being. And Michael had answered that call. As he drove toward the next emergency, toward the next chance to make a difference, Michael thought about Scout one last time, pictured him somewhere in the dark forest, warm in his den, surrounded by family, safe and wild and free. "Thank you," Michael whispered to the night, to the forest, to the memory of a kit standing in the road. The forest didn't answer, but somewhere in the darkness, a fox barked, sharp and bright like laughter or triumph or simply, "You're welcome." And Michael smiled, his hands steady on the wheel, his purpose clear, his heart full of all the wild and beautiful things that happen when we choose to see, to care, to act. The road stretched ahead, leading him toward the next beginning. Tell us in the comments where you're watching from and if you've ever witnessed or lived something like this.